Hi! In the last couple of videos, I've been talking about adding effects in LMMS. And so far, I've been treating effects as something where you just add them, set them, and then they stay at the same settings until you manually change them. But sometimes you want a song to have a little more reverb in one place, a gradual pan at some point. You want some effect knob to actually take on different values at different points during the song. One way to do that is automation tracks. I'm going to go into this instrument here. I'm going to add an effect. It will be the reverb effect I've talked about. And I'm going to set it up so this knob here changes. Right now it's going to sound like this. Move it up here. Move it down here. So I want this knob to take on different values at different times. To do that, I add an automation track. I hold down Control, left drag there. We now have a box for controlling this with this graph. Double click it. It's the same graph editor as you might have seen earlier if you saw my video where I talked about pitch bend. And I can assign values here that will apply to this knob as the song progresses. Let's see. Doop, 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 doop. Let's just do that. So as you saw, this blend knob actually moved in time with the track, and the audio was affected accordingly. And that is the simplest thing you can do to make an effect that behaves differently over the course of a song. Another thing you can do, and let's use a different effect for this, just to keep the video varied, is attach an effect to an oscillator. In your instrument panel, you have the ability to set an oscillator just specifically for volume, cutoff, and resonance. And those oscillators are synced to the start of the note. You can also have oscillators that control pretty much any knob at all that are synced to the overall song instead of synced to individual notes. To make one of those, we open up the controller rack with this round button. Hit Add. We now have an LFO controller. This LFO controller is named Controller 1. I am going to tell this knob here to belong to this controller. Right click. Let's move it up so you can see the whole window. Right click. Connect to controller. You can set it to a MIDI controller if you have a pitch knob on a keyboard that's plugged in, for instance. But we're not doing that. We're doing a user controller, and this one is named Controller 1. So, this knob is now being controlled by this thing, which, as you see, is doing its thing already. Let's set the amount to near 0. So it's just going back and forth a little. Speed tells it how long it takes to move back and forth. Larger numbers are slower movement, and smaller numbers are faster movement. If you need a different speed scale, these buttons over here can do that. Bass tells it where the center that's moving around is. So if I move the bass there, now it's moving back and forth, centered around that angle. If I move the bass there, it's moving back and forth, centered around that angle. Move up the amount a little more. You have it moving back and forth more. Turn the time down, moves faster. What we can do for the timing also is right-click, tempo sync, and we can hook it up to the timing of the song. Let's do that. So it goes back and forth every half note. Going to turn off the reverb, so we just hear this thing, and let's hear that. Alright, that didn't sound like much because this is turned up so high it was almost a square wave the entire time. So let's move the bass. Let's move the bass so the knob is going like that. So we have it going from the 0 position to a little bit forwards. Let's look at that again. So it's starting squarish and then turning triangle-ish. Phase offset lets you affect how it syncs up to the song. If I were to change this from 0 degrees to, let's try 90 degrees, or 92 degrees, why not? It's going the same pattern, but it's starting the pattern from a different position. We play with that a little. And of course, these effects are both in the chain. The reverb is being affected by this, the clip is being affected by this controller, and we could have those together if we want. So those are two different ways that we can have the value on a knob change over the course of the song. I've been showing this by using the knobs on effects, but most knobs in LMMS will work. I could apply the pan knob, the volume knob. If I were using an instrument that had knobs on the instrument itself, like triple oscillator has lots of knobs, I could take any of these knobs and automate them or control them. I can even take the knob on a controller and automate that. Let's do that. Let's take this amount knob and let's drag it to here. So right now it's at 0.26. Let's change that. Let's have it go more like straight lines. And let's turn off the reverb so I'm just hearing the one thing. So now this knob will move over the course of the song, which will affect how much this knob moves every half note. So we can set up a complicated effect where the automation track feeds the controller feeds the clip effect, and the change in the sound over time itself changes over time. And you can chain these together quite a bit if you want. It's possible to have all kinds of things controlling each other in LMMS. Sometimes it'll get glitchy. I would advise not even trying to control the tempo, time signature, or pitch range, for example. But many knobs can be controlled usefully using automation tracks, controllers, and combinations thereof. LFO controllers are the default controller you get when you just hit add here. There's another type of controller you can have. This is going to take a little more fanciness to explain. Let's have a second instrument. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a peak controller. This is now a controller that lives in my controller rack. It's number controller 2. And this controller is using the volume of this instrument to decide what it's doing. And I'm going to set this clip. So instead of being on controller 1, it's now on controller 2. And now, the volume of this track is determining the peak controller value, which determines the clip effect on this track. And of course, you can adjust the bass and the amount to do that with. So that track can give you a way to have a track's effect go in and out based on what another track is doing. An amount can be negative, so it can go out when the track is louder instead of in. Base and amount are the main things you use on a peak controller. The base is saying, if there's no volume here, where does my thing end up? And the amount is, how much is it moved depending on volume. Attack and decay affect how it interprets this volume and converts it into a number, how smoothed out it is, more or less. And melt just changes the scale of the amount knob in case you're in a situation where your volume isn't changing very much, but you still need a large amount because this knob only goes up so high. This can basically just make this knob more powerful when necessary. So that's peak controllers. You might imagine, for instance, using a peak controller for ducking, where when one track is loud, another track gets quieter, by just automating the volume knob and setting a negative amount. So, automation tracks, peak controllers, and LFO controllers are three things that you can do that can cause almost any control in LMMS to change over the course of the song. Automation tracks, you draw a direct curve. LFO controllers, you set parameters for a wave, which can be several different wave shapes. And peak controllers use the volume of one instrument's output as the input to a control that affects another instrument. I don't use the peak controller very often. I don't use the LFO controller super often either. I do use automation tracks pretty frequently, especially when I want volume fades. I can just put a volume on an automation track, and then at the beginning and end have little ramps up and down into the thing. That's all I have to show you in today's video. I hope this is useful and demystifies more of the many bizarre options found in LMMS's dearly documented GUI. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.